Welcome all to the CD event on Agenda 2024, Priorities for South Africa's New Government. I am Mwanda Ngosi, a board member here at the CDE, and more importantly for today, a proud South African. As many of you know, the CDE, or the Center for Development and Enterprise in full, is an independent think tank focused on issues related to South Africa's development, including economic growth, employment, and democracy. Over the last 29 years, the CDE has brought together local and international subject matter experts and a range of stakeholders from business, government, and civil society to contribute to South Africa's development. In that spirit, today, the CDE's founder and executive director, Bernstein, will launch a project that is a collaborative effort across various parts of our society. That project is Agenda 2024. 30 years into our democracy, we are at an important juncture in the journey to creating a country that is both prosperous and inclusive. The government that will shortly come into place, be it a coalition, government of national unity, a minority government, or whatever form it ultimately takes, will have a whole host of issues to solve. But it will not be able to resolve them all at once. As all of you know, if everything is a priority, then nothing is. Therefore, the CDE has collaborated with a range of experts and stakeholders to develop a proposal on the key priorities the next government should focus on immediately to put South Africa on the track to becoming a prosperous and inclusive country. Now, these issues are intentionally not exhaustive of all the issues that South Africa faces. Otherwise, that would be the full list, not the priority list. We all know that effective change starts with leadership. Therefore, we have also chosen to start this event with a few remarks from Dr. Reuel Khoza, a proud South African who exemplifies many of the leadership qualities that are needed for our country's journey ahead. Dr. Khoza needs little introduction, as he is so widely known and respected in both the public and private sectors in our country, having chaired some of the most important institutions, including Eskom and multiple JSE top 40 companies. He is also a long-standing friend of the CDE. We will have Q&A at the end after Dr. Khoza's remarks and Anne's presentation. So if you have questions as we go along, I ask you to please write them in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And we'll put as many of those questions forward as possible in the allotted time at the end. Dr. Khoza, over to you.
Thank you very much, Monde, and I'm also obliged to the audience that has set aside some time to listen to what we might have to say in the current circumstances in the country. South Africa is currently in a state of bewilderment, in my observation, perplexed and anxious, asking such questions as, precisely what brought us to this painful juncture? What is happening to our acclaimed, world-acclaimed, as it were, rainbow nation? Who will rescue us from this political, socio-economic morass? What political formation has the leadership wherewithal to re-imbue this nation with a sense of hope, a beckoning vision to national well-being, security, self-sufficiency, sustainability, and prosperity? Now, these are the questions that I believe are confronting many in our beloved nation. But one thing is certain: every nation is in a process of becoming an anachronism, essentially irrelevant to the future, doomed to dependency and perpetual followership, merging with other behind-the-curve laggards, or of becoming the harbinger of the future. Before 1994, South Africa was destined to be among the former category, the wretched of the earth. The advent of democracy launched the country into the latter category, the harbinger of a bright future for itself and for the continent of Africa. And for a decade and a half or so, it held this promise. The question is, what happened? My submission is that the country was hijacked by bad leadership. Leadership that is characterized by incompetence, that's unethical, intemperate, callous, corrupt, and at times downright uncaring and evil. Among such leaders, we have betrayers of our world-acclaimed constitution and saboteurs of the institutional forms that underpin our democracy. What does South Africa now need? I would like to reflect a little bit on the kind of leadership that I believe could come to our rescue. It is a leadership whose defining features are probity, humility, and integrity. A leadership that stands for the truth and affirmation of the good and whose primary pursuit is noble causes and the common good. I believe we need a leadership that demonstrates competence, tenacity, and a sense of efficacy. A leadership that does not shy away from the difficult nor the unpopular, but wholesome decisions or measures. A leadership that practices introspection and self-renewal, adapting to what is unfolding as megatrends in the world. A leadership that lives by the tenets of consultation, persuasion, and accommodation. I believe we need a leadership which understands that the success of others does not diminish its own success, but as to the good of the Commonwealth. We seek to have a leadership that deeply believes that the locus of control for South Africa and for Africa's future is within Africa itself. A leadership that acts as much for today as it does for the future, and does not consume seed capital, but invests such seed capital for ensuring generations. We need a leadership which will help us bridge the schisms and cleavages wrought by the religious, tribal, racial, social, ideological, economic, and political diversity that characterizes much of Africa today. A leadership that understands the difference between cause and effect, and for whom the means are as important as the ends. We yearn for a leadership that is visionary and as passionate as it is compassionate. South Africa is a political economy in a global context. The leadership that we seek should do nothing that will frighten foreign direct investment and cause capital flight. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khoza. Many words they're stuck with all of us around. I see in the Q&A box, which I can see, everyone else can't see. It's not yet questions, it's people actually agreeing with you that all good governance starts with excellent ethical leadership and political leadership. So thank you for those comments from those in the audience, and please continue to keep the comments and questions coming, and which we will address in due course. Thank you, Dr. Khoza, for those wise words. That is then the perfect segue, that piece on leadership, to the next item on our agenda, which is the presentation by the CDE's founder and executive director, Anne Bernstein. And over to you.
Thanks very much, Mondi, and good morning, everybody. I'm just going to put up my slides, if you'll bear with me. Right. Sorry about that, everybody. Over the past 6 months, CDE has been working with teams of experts, business leaders, former public servants, and academics, trying to answer what in many respects is the most important question facing the country. What can a new government do to get South Africa back on track after 15 years of stagnation and decline? So today we launch this initiative by providing an overall framework of how we see this critical and large task. And in the next weeks and months, we will be releasing a series of reports spelling out our specific proposals in much more detail. We started this work in the hope that South Africa may get a new government committed to making the tough decisions needed to get us off the path of failure and onto a new road. And as I speak today, this hope is still alive. No one knows what kind of coalition will emerge over the next few days. But if that coalition is to succeed in improving South Africa's prospects, it will need to change what government does and how it does it. Negotiations about new governing arrangements for South Africa should not only be about power, politics, and positions, but also about priorities for action. We have a country in deep trouble that needs fixing. So policy and priorities need to be part of the negotiations and the deal that is being talked about as we meet today. So we offer this policy agenda today to try and influence the negotiations about our new government, and also in the hope that when we have a new government, it will take these policy priorities seriously and recognize that we need a very different approach to reform and governance from what we have seen over the past 15 years. The country is in deep trouble. Growth has stagnated and declined. Unemployment and crime among the worst in the world. It's 3 years since a near insurrection, and not one ringleader is in jail. The state is collapsing. Not everything, there are still pockets of excellence, but we can all see what is happening around us. Capital, firms, and skilled people are immigrating, and we keep repeating the same mistakes and hoping that outcomes will be different. The government in the 6th administration had a tendency to wait for crises to get so bad and then call in business leaders to help. Think about that for a moment. The most prominent business leaders in the country have to stop what they're doing in order to help the government run South Africa. Now, there are many things that business and business leaders can contribute to our society, but emergency repairman is not the best way in which to govern a modern country. It doesn't have to be like this. We have made the choices that have got us here, and we South Africans can make others. We need to be much more ambitious for what this country can be. We can change, we can deliver, and we can grow this economy. And we can indeed help millions of people to get themselves out of poverty. If we get the environment right, investors will return. We are, after all, a country of enormous potential. It's our view that there is phenomenal energy in the people in this country, and what we have to do is free them up and empower them so that they can get on with their lives and building a better future. So what should the next government do first? We've had one bold signal. I think it's important that the ruling African National Congress has accepted the results of this election, and they're busy dealing with the consequences of that. That's an important signal about our democracy. The next and most important signal is that we have to find a governing arrangement, a new government or coalition that excludes those parties who are not committed to our constitution, the rule of law, and peaceful political action. As the chairman said, we can't fix everything at once. It's very tempting to try to do that, but that is the wrong approach. And so we are saying that the country needs bold signals. We need to send bold signals by the new government to citizens, to investors, to civil servants, to everybody, that South Africa is on a new and decisive path back to where we were some 15 years ago. We have to take a few critical, big decisions now that will have longer-term consequences. We must not avoid the hard choices, because if you avoid them today, we will never get to them. So we need to choose our priorities wisely. And if we do so, we can provide hope to millions of people who work so hard, who try, but cannot get out of back-breaking poverty. We think we need fewer promises, fewer words, and a lot more action if we are to restore the credibility of leadership. Now, many of you might want me to put forward a growth strategy today, and I wish we could. But the truth is, South Africa has to fix the basics first. We have to stop falling before we can rise. Investors will not risk their money if they cannot get their goods to markets or if our ports don't work effectively. They will not risk capital if they have to give away a large part of their business before it's even up and running. And the private sector cannot build roads, bridges, and new housing if they are attacked by criminals in the process of doing so. We now have so-called mafias through many sectors of our economy that are crippling development and growth. So the priorities I'm going to put forward today are action-oriented and are built really on a story. This is a story of states and markets and how they can work well together to perform great things. It's a story about poverty and how we establish the roads out of that for millions of people. It's a tale of successful racial transformation and not destroying the very institutions we need to build a truly transformed country. It's about foundations for a stable, democratic, and just society, which deal with sound finances and the rule of law. And most important of all, it's a story about how important leadership can be and how destructive it is to not appoint the right people in key positions. So let's turn then to the first 180 days of a new government. We have to recognize that this is not a normal time. We face so many crises on almost every front. More of the same, hesitant, slow, incomplete, reluctant, last-minute reforms are not going to be good enough. We have to act with a real sense of urgency to turn the country around. So what should the new government do first? We have selected 5 priority areas for action, and I will quickly give you a feel of what we're talking about in these 5 areas. Let's start with the first one. 3 simple words: fix the state, which refers to a very complex situation that needs to be radically different. The quality of governance matters a great deal. And this is one of the fundamental causes of why we are in such a terrible situation, because the quality of governance has deteriorated. We have picked 2 big areas in which to concentrate and to develop practical proposals. We need to fix cabinet processes so that better decisions are made. We need a smaller, more effective cabinet, and we will be proposing a reduction of the cabinet from 30 ministers to some 19 ministers. And then really importantly, we're saying we can't get rid of cadre deployment or bad appointments in the civil service all at once. So let's identify what we're calling mission critical jobs for the reform and the priorities we're putting forward. And let's ensure that the best possible people fill these absolutely critical jobs. Directors General and the teams they can build are absolutely vital if we're going to execute the priorities we're putting on the table. So that's our first area. The second area, another big one, concerns growth and development and freeing up markets. In our view, the government needs to recognize the importance of markets, of competition, and of firms. And they should not treat all development challenges as a justification for expanded state action. Now, there's been a lot of talk about public-private partnerships, and we welcome the draft regulations that have just been issued. And partnerships are an important way to harness private sector capacity and resources for infrastructure. But this is only part of what needs to be done. Business needs an honest, competent, reliable, consistent partner in the state. And public-private partnerships should not be used to prop up failing state monopolies. In our view, this government must stop blocking private sector activities through over-regulation. There's so much more that private companies can do in meeting South Africa's challenges. Whether it's energy generation or the aviation industry, private firms have delivered, and there are many other areas in which they are delivering, and much more can be done. In our view, we should stop talking about red tape endlessly. This has become an industry, but nobody ever tells you exactly what it is that's causing all of this red tape. And in our view, it has to do with the competence of the state, but it also has to do with a ill thought through approach to the empowerment of Black South Africans and an ill thought through approach to localization in our economy. We need a much more competitive economy, and it shouldn't just be for the private sector, it has to be in the public sector as well. We also need to be a much more competitive economy in the global competition for investment. We have to be welcoming investors and competitive because they have many other places that they can put their money. The last point here is that the new government has to change attitudes to the private sector throughout the state. Private firms are certainly not perfect, and market competition can't solve everything. But we do know that if we freed it up, the state stepped aside, market-driven economic growth will really help transform South Africa more quickly than anything else. Our third big area for prioritization is to build a new approach to deal with poverty and inequality. We think it's fair to say that the current approach to dealing with poverty in this country has failed. Do we really want to be a place that boasts about the growing numbers of people dependent on state welfare? Now, many people see inclusion as an afterthought. We see this differently. If we can fix the state, quality services will help empower the poor, from good public transport to good quality schooling. If we can get growth going much faster and in a more job-rich way, a job is going to be the fastest route out of poverty for millions of people. We're interested at CDE in mass empowerment, not elite enrichment. And in addition to all of this, we are going to put forward some practical proposals to incentivize low-skill employment. We're looking at strengthening the employment tax incentive, at low-skill manufacturing, at how we use our special economic zones, and at our labor market, which needs reform. In addition to that, we take seriously the calls for more support for Black entrepreneurs. We are spending billions of money in the state to do this. It's almost an add-on to every department that we're going to support small Black business. We think getting more entrepreneurs and more firms in South Africa is a difficult task. Let's give it to the people with experience at actually getting it done. So we want to redirect funds out of the state into 2 or 3 big funds and agencies in the private sector to see if they can do a better job at supporting and helping Black entrepreneurs who might start small, but we hope can grow to be bigger and bigger. So a whole different angle on how to think about poverty, inequality, and inclusion. Our 4th priority area is the one that most people don't really want to think about, but it's absolutely vital. We are spending beyond our means, and our growing debt affects our capacity to grow this economy. So the first injunction here is that the new government must hold the line. If the Minister of Finance says we can't afford a national health insurance as presently designed, or a basic income grant, that needs to be government policy. Now, the most important way of dealing with our debt situation, which is eating away at our ability to do almost everything else in the state, is by growth. We can grow the economy, the debt becomes a smaller proportion of that, and we raise more taxes. So growth is, in many ways, the best answer to our challenge. But in addition to that, we have 3 practical areas we will be making proposals in. The first concerns the budget itself. After years of rapid growth in average remuneration in government, this needs to be moderated, and this line needs to be held. We need to find every possible way in which the current budget can redirect resources to growth and development rather than anything else. Have you ever heard of a government program that's been stopped because it failed or didn't work out as we thought it might? So we've got to also do that and ensure value for money. We spend a lot of money on schooling, but we don't get value for money. And that's the case in many departments. In addition to that, the state-owned companies are a massive drain on our fiscal situation, and we have to resolve this quickly and effectively for the long term. And we will be making proposals in this area. And lastly, if you look at procurement, this seems to us to be a vital area for fundamental reform. We know it's been an area of corruption, but it is a big part of our GDP, around 15% every year. And if we can get this better, if we can get value for money, if we stop paying people for things they don't deliver, whether it's housing projects or anything else, we think there are big savings to be made here that can really help South Africa and our fiscal challenges. Our final area is that we have to strengthen the rule of law, which according to some of the most prominent legal experts in the country is in dire straits. We have chosen at least 2 and possibly 3 areas to focus on here. The quality and independence of the judiciary is absolutely central, and we need to reform the Judicial Service Commission and how it operates. The National Prosecuting Authority has failed to hold powerful people to account for a long time now. And this is a fundamental source of the rot in our public life. The institution needs to be reinvigorated, and we need excellent professionals throughout the organization to strengthen its role, coupled with something like the Scorpions and independence for this institution. Our last area, which is absolutely vital and very big, very large, is the criminal justice system, which is not working well. Clearly, you need to have the right people at the top of our policing and other parts of this, and that is our, as I mentioned, our very first priority of get the right people in mission critical jobs. But we are exploring, if we focused on them bringing the murder rate down, if this could be a model of how to start fixing our policing and criminal justice overall. So those are our 5 priority areas for action. This is not a random list. They're carefully selected areas, and the actions we will be proposing will deal with critical catalytic actions within each of these 5 areas. To make all of this happen, we need a speedy legislative agenda that goes to Parliament as a matter of urgency by the new government. Now, as Reuel mentioned at the beginning, leadership really matters. He himself has demonstrated this when, as head of Eskom back in the early 2000s, he achieved important things with that institution. And if you look at how leaders like Deng Xiaoping in China or Manmohan Singh in India have introduced market reforms, have dealt with opposition, and stuck with it, they have changed hundreds of millions of people's lives and shown that it can be done. We look at Peru, where a new education minister in 3 short years introduced reforms and achieved dramatic improvements in the quality of schooling. Excuse me. And we only have to look at SARS as just one example where you get rid of a bad leader and you put in Edward Kieswetter, and we're well on the road to rebuilding SARS as a world-class institution. The most important way we can get out of our state of crisis is through new and more effective leadership. And the challenge for reforming leaders is that they have to stay focused on their chosen priorities and ensure execution. They have to make sure that they take the country with them and that they are the communicators in chief, sharing the vision, the steps that are being taken, the progress that's being made, and why this is all worthwhile. Let me pull this together. In our view, South Africa's multiplying crises require a new approach. Hard choices have to be made about people, about policies, and about how we get things done. We're not talking about low-hanging fruit or gestures or crisis response. What South Africa needs now are actions that commence and signal fundamental change. And time is not on our side. South Africa can be a successful and developed country in our view. We have to make the right choices now. So as I end, let me emphasize that at a time of political danger and change, our view is that South Africa needs a new government that is committed to the Constitution and to deepening absolutely essential reforms. In the negotiations happening this week, it is vital to include the priority actions, such as we are putting forward, as a part of the New Deal, the new coalition. After all, the new government has a country in crisis to fix. These are our proposals. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to questions and comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Anne. Enjoyed the presentation. You've whet our appetite today by giving us the framework and the outline and a lot of the detail in each of the 5 buckets to follow in the subsequent weeks, starting actually next week with the first of those 5. So let's move on then to the Q&A, and thank you very much to everyone who has written questions in the Q&A box. You can continue to do so as we go into the questions. I will just caution that there's 25 plus questions, which we obviously won't get through in the remaining time. So I will group some of them and we'll get to as many as we can as we go through. So the first group of questions here, Anne, is centered on this topic that we don't need more plans as a country, we need implementation. So as you think about Agenda 2024, how practical is it, or is it another sort of big picture plan?
That's a really important question. Thank you. One of the things that has been happening in South Africa the last few years is that a lot of people acknowledge that the state has been hollowed out and is weak and with a lot of corruption. But in the next breath, they call on the same state to make a whole lot of changes. And we're trying to communicate, and a test we've had for our recommendations is that we have to recognize that while you rebuild the state, which will take time, you have to free up other actors in society to do what they can do, and as much as they can do. So we've done our very best in the circumstances to think hard about how you can fix key parts of the state from the beginning, cabinet, the presidency, and who are your key appointments. And that has to be done fast so that you can start fixing the state around the priorities we've itemized or that the new government selects. And at the same time, we're saying free up the private sector and markets. Let's get more firms operating in South Africa, and also let's see what civil society organizations and NGOs could also be doing. And there is some international precedence for, in the context of a weak state, civil society organizations taking a bigger role than has hitherto been the case in our country.
Thank you very much, Anne. The next one is directed to Dr. Khoza, the next bucket of questions. Dr. Khoza, the question that comes is, how do we elevate the conversation from ideological camps, where it partially is today, to a discussion on what is best for South Africa as we think about all the coalition talks that are happening now, and also the role of Agenda 2024 in trying to shape that narrative and discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I think, unfortunately, Reuel Khoza has had to leave us, so I'm not sure he can respond to that.
Okay, all right. My apologies there. You're still on the line. Got it. And perhaps then if I throw the question across to you on elevating the conversation from ideological camps to what's best for the country as a whole and Agenda 2024's role.
Well, that's a hard question. What we can do as a policy think tank that's tried to bring together lots of the experts throughout South Africa is to try and get our voice heard and to always try and get evidence and practical, pragmatic ideas onto the table rather than emotion or ideology. So I think all of us need to stick with facts rather than rumors spread on social media, and try and engage in conversations with each other, especially people who disagree with us about the most pragmatic way forward for South Africa. We will use the work that we're doing to try and influence as many people as possible. And as the chairman said, our first detailed action document will be released next week, with the second document the following week. And we will distribute these as widely as possible. And as soon as we have a new government, we will try and influence that government and important people around it. And we will try and use the media of all kinds as much as possible to get a reasonable conversation about priorities for action and what we're proposing. We're certainly not saying this is a science. We welcome debate, but we think these 5 priority areas would set South Africa up in the right path to start getting back on the road to prosperity and a much better future for millions of people.
Thank you very much, Anne. The only point I'd add there from the CDE's perspective is that we've been very much motivated by the level of collaboration which we've received in developing these various pieces, both the overall 5 and then the subsequent action documents that come from a range of stakeholders across civil society, across business, and various parts of our society. So that feeds into exactly what you're saying, and of the discussion is what's best for South Africa and across a range of stakeholders rather than ideological camps. The third bucket is on leadership and ethical leadership. There's an acknowledgement that if you don't have the right people in the right positions, almost everything else that follows becomes a bit of an academic exercise. It really does depend on having the right leaders in place. So does the Agenda 2024 touch on how we get the right people in the right positions?
It certainly does. You're right, this is an absolutely critical question, and it's one that we spent a lot of time thinking about. Now, unfortunately, our cabinet is chosen from members of parliament only, with 2 exceptions. The new president has the right to appoint 2 cabinet ministers who are not members of parliament. And we would urge that these are 2 people with considerable experience to bring to the cabinet and leadership qualities that we're looking for. So the cabinet is tricky, but if you go beyond the cabinet, directors general in departments, for example, are the CEOs, effectively, the key leadership figures in executing policy. And our recommendations in the next 2 weeks will go into some detail on how we see changing influencing who is appointed to which positions, a mechanism to do this as quickly as possible, and a proposal on how in key, absolutely vital positions, we both get rid of people who've been accused of corruption and seem to endlessly hang around on full salary and not doing any work. So we have a proposal on how to deal with that. But in a positive vein, we are suggesting that people will need to reapply for their jobs, and in a fair and appropriate way, but speedy, that we look at getting the right people with the right qualifications to do important jobs in the state as a first step to a much more professional civil service.
Again, the questions are continuing to come in at a faster rate than we can answer them. So we're falling behind. The next bucket that I'll come to is it's questions that relate to the third pillar you had there, which was building a new approach to mass inclusion. Quite a few comments have come across on the topic of employment, youth unemployment in particular, but employment broadly. And the questions are how you're prioritizing this in Agenda 2024.
I think as those of you who know CDE, you will know that we have been working on employment issues and youth unemployment issues for well over a decade now, and shouting at the country that this has to be priority number one. So I can assure you that this is a very important component of our agenda. And when I say we're seeing this slightly differently from other people, or very differently in some areas, there's been a lot of talk on projects and initiatives and public employment to deal with this catastrophic situation of mass unemployment. And everybody should do everything they can. But the only way to get millions and millions of people into jobs, not job opportunities, but jobs, is to grow the economy as fast as we can and to make our economy as job rich as possible. So we need to look carefully at when we subsidize capital rather than employment. And we need to look carefully at our labor market and make sure that we are making it as easy as possible, as attractive as possible for employers to hire people without experience or who've never had a job. We've got to free that up, and that means changes to the labor laws. We've got to make sure that collective bargaining agreements do not include parties who are not party to the agreement. So it's fine for, if you like, the top part of our economy, employers and trade unions, to agree on both wages and the conditions that they want to operate under. But we think this disadvantages the people who are not round the table, which is smaller firms, rural firms, new firms, and that we need to make sure that those can have freedom to operate and to grow. So there's a lot to talk about in this area, where obviously this time of enormous unemployment, you have to support public employment, but don't forget that what the ANC manifesto calls job opportunities, the president's employment stimulus, all of this concerns part-time, short-term employment, often 3 to 4 months. And there's no guarantee of anything else. Some people do learn skills in their short term, but the vast majority of people don't. So this is a stopgap. We've got to focus much more attention on how we grow the economy and make it as easy for employers to hire people and therefore fire people as possible.
Thank you, Anne. The last few questions then, I think we'll get into the last three now, and before we wrap up. There's one topic here where we've got opposing views coming through in the questions. So someone has put forward a question saying, do we need the economic equivalent of the TRC? Grant amnesty for past corruption if it's confessed, and then punish it heavily going forward. There's another question which says the rule of law should be the only priority, and those who have been found guilty or those who have committed acts of corruption in the past, we need to strengthen our capacity to, as a country, to charge and convict those people. Which side of this are you falling on in Agenda 2024? Is this an economic TRC or the opposite?
Well, I'm pleased there's division and that this issue's been raised, because choosing priorities is really hard. And it's very tempting to say, let's just fix this. Let's just get the crooks in jail. Stop the looting at the state and get the crooks in jail. But that's not sufficient. And that's Well, somebody said to me, that only deals with the past. I don't think it only deals with the past, because unless you instill fear in people with bad intentions, it will continue. So making crooks worry that they will be found out and have to pay the cost of their wrongdoing is very important for the future of our society. And we have to put enormous attention there. But we have to get growth going. We cannot continue as a society with some 40% of the workforce unemployed. And if you're a young person, it's well close to 70% now. Think about that. It's just untenable. So we have to choose a few priorities, and then we've got to stick to them. So I'm in favor of the rule of law plus growth and employment and a few other things. And you've got to fix the state. There are many people who think CDE hates government. We certainly don't. We're not those people who are rubbing their hands with glee at the fact that the state is collapsing and therefore there's more space for the private sector or firms to get on with things. I think that's the wrong approach altogether. A developing country, any country, needs a capable state. We need a state that's able to do the basics. Keep me safe when I go out of my apartment. Make sure that young kids aren't attacked when they come home from school, as well as protecting our public resources managed by the state from being looted. So they're basic things the state has to do. We need that. And we need the state to regulate competition, because otherwise we won't get all the benefits of market players and much greater economic activity. We will get a lot of disadvantages. So I'm in favor of a capable state, and that has to be a priority as well. And you can't deal with the rule of law issues unless we have a capable state and more effective policing and so on and so forth. So choosing priority is hard. We've chosen the ones that we have, and I think they are more or less the right ones, but they're certainly pointing the country in the right direction. And we've got to stick to the chosen priorities as soon as we have a new government.
Thank you. And the penultimate question then, still staying on this topic of the rule of law, is are there any laws, perhaps you could give an example, that you feel in the context of Agenda 2024 may need some sort of amendment or strengthening or changing or even repealing?
There are a lot, unfortunately. We were going to put up the 10 laws that should be repealed, but we haven't finalized that yet. I think the national health insurance is the wrong approach to a vital national challenge, and the bill itself needs to be repealed, needs to be amended. You can debate whether you should throw it out altogether and start again, but do we need better healthcare for everybody and access to healthcare? Of course we do. But that bill is the wrong way to do it. We can't afford it, and you will drive many people in our fantastic health system to leave the country, and you will probably destroy rather than build what we all need. So there's one example. The public procurement amendment bill, which has just gone through Parliament, is a very problematic bill, and we think it should be repealed and the president shouldn't sign it. There are others. As I've already indicated, the labor laws, the laws affecting our labor market need to be changed. Not wholesale, but we need to change them to accommodate the realities of a country with massive unemployment, mainly of unskilled, inexperienced young people. So those are just a few. I could go on and on. There are other laws that need to be amended or repealed, and we will be spelling these out in each of our action documents as we go along. I think
Thank you, Anne.
yeah.
The final question, they're not letting you off easy here. The final question, which is really a foundational one that centers what this entire conversation has been about. There have been several questions, both during Dr. Khoza's comments as well as during your presentation, about the Constitution. The Constitution has been under fire in recent weeks. I think that's clear for all to see. It remains under fire as we speak from quite powerful interests. Some who want to change it and disregard certain elements of it. Foundationally, is Agenda 2024 going with adherence to the Constitution, or does Agenda 2024 also see areas where the Constitution may need to be changed?
I think our position is very clear. We're proud of South Africa's constitution that was negotiated in 1996, and we see it as the foundation document for our democratic state. We're in favor of democracy. Now, a constitution is a living document, and you learn. Some things the constitution got right, some things the constitution got wrong. I'm in favor, for example, of a different approach to how we elect parliament. I think you need a PR system and direct constituency representatives so that we get much greater accountability. That would require constitutional amendment. And there are many other areas, but I think the debate at the moment in our politics is that there are some parties that are not democratic. They do not believe in democracy and human rights, and an executive that is held accountable by the people through parliament and the rule of law. CDE is absolutely on the other side. We believe in the rule of law and the essence of the Constitution and its foundation stone for our new democracy, 30-year-old democracy. But will there be amendments to that Constitution as we learn and go along? Absolutely. That's very different from throwing the Constitution out and putting all power in the executive and minimizing the role of the courts and the judiciary to hold the executive to account, and minimizing Parliament's role in holding the executive to account. So some very big and complex issues, but I think CDE's position is clear.
It's crystal clear. Thank you, Anne. And if I may just open it up to you for any closing remarks before I conclude. Anne?
No, thank you very much for your time, everybody. Look out for our first action document, which will be released widely next week. And thank you for participating, and I hope you found this interesting. And thanks to Mondi for chairing and to Reuel Khoza for participating in today's event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you again to everyone who has joined this call and collaborated with the CDE and continuing to collaborate with the CDE on Agenda 2024 and each of the 5 buckets and all of the detail that sits within there. We've been very grateful for all of the collaboration that we've received. So as Anne said, today was really whetting your appetite and giving you the overall framework. And next week we start then with the main course, which will be that first action document in a week's time. We look forward to the ongoing dialogue and the collaboration with you all.
Thanks very much.